Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at some excerpts from observations on Japan's sex industry.
Oh, interesting.
And it's a really interesting look into some of the things that are happening in Japan that most tourists never see.
Right.
And it is a firsthand account from a tourist who we'll call John.
Okay.
And John had some very interesting experiences and observations that he wanted to share with the world.
Yeah, and one thing that really struck me reading through this was just how John was kind of immediately thrust into the deep end of this world.
Yeah.
He talks about attending this really high-end dinner and witnessing woo, which is this practice of serving sushi on a naked woman's body.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
You have these powerful businessmen in this luxurious setting engaging in something that seems so out of step with modern Japan.
Yeah, it's jarring.
Yeah, it's like a scene from a movie almost.
Really is.
This stark contrast.
Yeah.
And then it gets even more unsettling when he visits Osaka's infamous red light district, Haseo.
Right.
And the way he describes it is fascinating. He calls it a human comic book store.
Wow.
Filled with women presented as living dolls.
It really makes you think about, the line between fantasy and reality in this world.
Absolutely. And that's what I think sets the stage for this whole exploration of what drives this industry.
Yeah.
And one of the key things that jumps out from John's account is the role of poverty.
Right.
And how it pushes women into sex work.
Yeah.
There's this one anecdote that really stuck with me. It's about a 30-year-old woman who goes to a government official seeking financial assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And she's actually advised to consider entering the sex industry.
Oh, my God.
It's just unbelievable.
It really is.
You'd think in a developed nation like Japan, there would be more robust safety nets.
Absolutely.
But it really highlights the economic disparities that women face, despite the fact that Japan has very high levels of female education. I mean, just look at the statistics.
Yeah.
Japan ranks 118th out of 146 countries in the Global Gender Gap Report.
It's pretty dismal.
It is. And it's this gap between education and opportunity that really traps a lot of these women.
Right.
They're highly qualified, but they end up in low-paying, unstable jobs because of societal expectations and limited career paths.
It's a real problem.
And that leads to stories like Hanada Miki's,
Right.
the single mother working day and night to barely make ends meet.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Stuck in this cycle of low-wage jobs.
Mm.
And then you have university graduates like AI and Maki,
Right.
who are burdened by student loans and the pressure to support their families.
Yeah, and it's all happening against the backdrop of, some pretty stark statistics.
Mhm.
The source mentions that the poverty rate for single women and single mothers in Japan is a staggering 50%.
It is, and when you factor in things like the recent economic downturn, the weakening yen, the decrease in GDP per capita,
Right.
things are only getting tougher for these women.
Yeah, so we have this backdrop of economic hardship.
Mm-hmm.
But what's really poignant is how the source delves into the human cost of this industry.
Absolutely.
It shatters this myth of social acceptance.
Right.
We often hear about how sex work is more accepted in Japan.
Yeah.
But it turns out there's a lot of hidden prejudice and stigma surrounding it.
There is, and the source presents numerous stories that underscore the desperation driving many of these women.
Right.
It's not just about making ends meet, it's about dealing with family burdens.
Like what kinds of things?
Abusive husbands, gambling debts, crippling childcare expenses.
Oh, wow.
There's one heartbreaking example of a woman forced into sex work to cover her brother's gambling debts.
It's unbelievable.
It really highlights the immense pressure and responsibility that's placed on women in Japanese society.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole emergence of this phenomenon called which translates to papakatsu.
Okay.
And it involves young women engaging in compensated dating with older men, often blurring the lines between companionship and exploitation.
I see.
The source shares the story of Mariko, a housewife who's trapped in a financially abusive marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And unable to leave because of societal pressure and financial dependence, she turns to papakatsu as a way to regain some control over her life.
Right.
It's a stark reminder of the limited options available to women in Japan, especially when it comes to something like divorce.
Yeah.
The stigma associated with being a single mother, the lack of financial support,
Right.
it makes it almost impossible for many women to escape these situations.
Yeah.
And in fact, the source notes that a significant portion of women working in the sex industry are single mothers. It really highlights this interconnected web of social and economic challenges that they face.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've got this backdrop of economic hardship, but then you have these social pressures and these limited options.
Right.
And this brings us to a point where I think we need to take a deeper dive into the industry itself,
Okay.
beyond just the economic factors.
Yeah.
What I found really compelling was how the source explores the psychological impact of this work
Right.
and the hidden dangers that are lurking within.
Yeah, the source really emphasizes the constant pressure these women face to maintain a facade of cheerfulness, masking the emotional toll of the work.
Yeah, I mean,
Imagine having to suppress your true feelings day in and day out
right.
while navigating a world filled with judgment and danger.
Yeah.
It's a heavy burden to carry.
Absolutely. And then there's this whole other layer of complexity introduced with the world of AA. These are male hosts who offer companionship,
Right.
albeit for a price,
Yeah.
often attracting female sex workers who are seeking solace and connection.
Right. It's this really strange dynamic.
It is.
It adds a fascinating but unsettling dimension to this whole narrative.
Yeah, it really does.
It's like, on the one hand, these women are searching for genuine connection,
Right.
but they're doing so within a system that often perpetuates their exploitation. And the source highlights how the C, or credit system, that's prevalent in host clubs can be particularly dangerous.
Yeah. Explain that a little bit more.
So essentially, it allows women to rack up huge debts for the services they receive from the hosts.
Oh, wow.
And this essentially traps them in a cycle of financial and emotional dependence.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is, and the story of that young woman from Tokyo who was driven to sex work just to pay off her host club debt is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It shows how this system can spiral out of control and lead to really devastating consequences.
Absolutely.
It's not just about the money.
Right.
It's about the manipulative tactics that some of these hosts employ.
Yeah.
Preying on vulnerable women, leaving them emotionally scarred.
And the source even mentions cases of suicide attempts driven by the despair of these situations.
Exactly. It's a stark reminder that while these women are searching for genuine connection,
Right.
they're often met with further exploitation.
Yeah, and this really makes the work of organizations like the one run by Sakazumi Shingo all the more crucial.
Oh, tell me about that.
So they offer support and counseling to women working in the industry,
Okay.
trying to break through that isolation
Right.
and provide a safe haven.
So it's a glimmer of hope in this rather bleak landscape.
Yeah, it is.
But the source doesn't shy away from the harsh realities,
No.
even touching upon the prevalence of drug addiction as a coping mechanism for some of these women.
It's a sad reality.
It is. The story of Tomoko in my work, Kabukicho Guide,
Right.
is a tragic example of how someone can turn to drugs to escape the pain and trauma of their experiences, only to fall deeper into a spiral of despair.
Yeah, and it highlights this urgent need for comprehensive support systems
Absolutely.
that address both the physical and mental health needs of these women.
Right. And I think beyond the individual stories,
Yeah.
the source also takes a step back to examine the industry as a whole, exposing its inner workings and the often deceptive tactics that are used to lure women in.
Right, and one thing that really struck me was the story of Beniko. This aspiring artist who, at just 19, responded to an ad for a hostess job,
Wow.
only to discover that it was a front for a sex work establishment.
It's classic bait and switch,
It really is.
preying on the hopes and financial vulnerability of young women who are just trying to make ends meet.
Yeah.
And it's not just overt deception like that.
Right.
The source also exposes these more subtle forms of manipulation like the kinkye or matchmaking clubs,
Right.
which act as fronts for prostitution.
It's crazy how they create this veneer of normalcy.
They do.
They use euphemisms and seemingly innocent setups
Right.
to mask the exploitative nature of what's really going on.
Exactly. It's all about enticement. The industry excels at drawing women in with promises of high earnings and glamorous lifestyles,
Right.
only to trap them in a system that ultimately benefits those at the top.
And what's even more concerning is how the source suggests that practices like tuteeing can act as gateways into further exploitation.
Right. It's a slippery slope.
It really is.
What might start as a way to make quick money can blur the lines and desensitize women to the idea of selling their bodies.
Yeah, and this normalization of sex work among young people that John observed, is particularly alarming.
Absolutely.
There's that chilling anecdote about a group of young women casually discussing the prospect of entering the sex industry as if it were just another career choice.
Wow.
It speaks to a deeper shift in societal attitudes and perceptions.
Yeah, it really makes you question what factors are contributing to this trend.
It's a complex issue, and I don't think the source offers any easy answers.
No.
But it does shine a light on the role of intermediaries.
Right.
These dispatch companies organize as individuals who operate in the shadows, profiting from the labor of these women.
They present themselves as a support system, offering transportation accommodation, even childcare for single mothers. But in reality, it's a calculated strategy to maintain control.
Yeah, the source reveals that women often receive only a fraction of the earnings,
Right.
with the lion's share going to these companies and individuals who are exploiting the system.
And maintaining a veneer of respectability.
Exactly. Even relies on intermediaries
Right.
who connect women with potential patrons.
It just highlights the financial incentives that are driving this form of exploitation.
Yeah, and it's unsettling to see how even tourism plays a role.
Absolutely.
The source introduces us to Hayashi,
Okay.
a tour guide who openly acknowledges his involvement in facilitating sex tourism.
Oh, wow.
And he tries to justify it as inevitable.
It's almost like he's resigned to the fact that this industry is so entrenched that there's no escaping it.
Right.
But his statement raises serious ethical questions.
Yeah, it does.
About the role of individual responsibility within a system that seems to normalize and even encourage this kind of behavior.
Right. And this brings us to another crucial layer of the source's exploration. This connection between consumerism self-worth and the sex industry.
Interesting.
It's a fascinating and at times unsettling perspective.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear more about that.
Well, what really struck me was John's observation of this growing obsession with luxury goods among young Japanese, fueled by economic anxieties and the desire for social status.
Right. It paints a picture of a society grappling with insecurity and a need for validation,
Absolutely.
often seeking it through material possession.
And you see this contrast in the story about the young woman proudly showcasing her expensive kimono collection to John the tourist, highlighting the importance of outward appearances and status symbols in this world.
Right. And then there's that poignant anecdote about the girl who becomes fixated on John's Louis Vuitton bag.
Right.
It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about this yearning for a life of luxury
Right.
and the allure of material possessions as a marker of success and happiness.
And it makes you wonder, how does a society reconcile its economic progress with the exploitation and desperation faced by so many women within its borders?
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Absolutely. And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll delve deeper into the societal implications of Japan's sex industry
Right.
and consider the potential paths forward.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
So we left off talking about these male hosts, these kenofins, and how they fit into this whole picture.
Yeah, it's a strange paradox, isn't it?
It is.
You have these women seeking connection and solace,
Right.
but they're doing so within a system that often perpetuates their exploitation.
Exactly. And that's where this whole OO credit system comes in.
Right, the credit system prevalent in host clubs.
Exactly. And the source really highlights how dangerous this can be.
Yeah.
Because it allows women to rack up huge debts
Oh, wow.
for the services they receive from these hosts.
So they're essentially trapped
They are.
in this cycle of financial and emotional dependence.
It really is a vicious cycle.
And the story of that young woman from Tokyo
Right.
who was driven to sex work just to pay off her host club debt.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking.
It really is. And it just shows how this system can spiral out of control and lead to devastating consequences.
Absolutely.
And it's not just about the money either.
Right.
It's about the manipulative tactics that some of these hosts use.
Right. Preying on vulnerable women.
Exactly. Leaving them emotionally scarred.
And the source even mentions cases of suicide attempts driven by the despair of these situations.
It's a stark reminder that while these women are searching for genuine connection,
Right.
they're often met with further exploitation.
And it makes the work of organizations like the one run by Sakazumi Shingo even more crucial.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, they offer support and counseling to women working in the industry.
Okay.
They're really trying to break through that isolation,
Right.
provide a safe haven.
It's like a glimmer of hope in
Yeah.
this really bleak landscape that we've been talking about.
It really is.
Right.
But, the source doesn't shy away from the harsh realities either,
Right.
even touching upon the prevalence of drug addiction
Oh, wow.
as a coping mechanism for some of these women.
That's heavy.
It is the story of Tomoko from Your Kabukicho Guide.
Right.
It's a tragic example of how someone can turn to drugs to escape the pain and trauma of their experiences.
And then they just fall deeper into a spiral of despair.
Exactly. And it highlights the need for comprehensive support systems
Absolutely.
that address both the physical and mental health needs of these women.
For sure. I think beyond the individual stories, though,
Yeah.
the source also takes a step back to look at the industry as a whole
Right.
and how it operates.
Yeah, the mechanisms behind it all.
Yeah, exposing those inner workings and the often deceptive tactics that are used to lure women in.
And one thing that really struck me was the story of Beniko.
Oh, yeah.
This aspiring artist who, at just 19, responded to an ad for a hostess job, only to discover it was a front for a sex work establishment.
Oh, wow. That's awful.
It's classic bait and switch,
It is.
preying on the hopes and financial vulnerability of young women.
Right. They're just trying to make ends meet.
Exactly.
And it's not always that overt deception either.
Right.
The source talks about these more subtle forms of manipulation as well. Like CA or matchmaking clubs,
Okay.
which act as fronts for prostitution.
It's crazy how they create this veneer of normalcy,
They do.
using euphemisms and seemingly innocent setups
Right.
to mask what's really going on.
Exactly. And it's all about
And
enticement.
Right.
The industry is so good at drawing women in with these promise of high earnings.
Right, a glamorous lifestyle.
But then they just trap them in the system that ultimately benefits those at the top.
And what's even more concerning is how the source suggests that things like,
Right.
can act as gateways into further exploitation.
This is a slippery slope for sure.
It really is.
What might start as a way to make some quick money can really blur the lines and desensitize women to the whole idea of selling their bodies.
And this normalization of sex work among young people is alarming.
It is.
There's that anecdote about the group of young women casually discussing
Oh,
the
yeah.
prospect of entering the sex industry.
Like it's just another career choice.
Exactly.
It's wild.
It speaks to this deeper shift in societal attitudes.
Absolutely makes you wonder what's contributing to this trend.
It's a complex issue, and I don't think the source offers any easy answers.
No, it doesn't.
But it does shine a light on the role of these intermediaries.
Right.
The dispatch companies, the organizers, the individuals who operate in the shadows, profiting from the labor of these women.
They present themselves as this support system,
Right.
offering transportation accommodation, even childcare for single mothers.
Right.
But it's really just a calculated strategy to maintain control.
And the source points out that women often receive only a fraction of the earnings, with the lion's share going to these companies and individuals who are exploiting the system.
And maintaining this facade of respectability.
Exactly. And even Hind relies on these intermediaries
Right.
who connect the women with potential patrons.
It just highlights the financial incentives driving this whole form of exploitation.
It's unsettling to see how even tourism plays a role.
Absolutely.
The source introduces us to Hayashi, a tour guide, who openly acknowledges his involvement in facilitating sex tourism.
Wow. And what does he say about it?
He tries to justify it.
As inevitable.
It's almost like he's resigned to the fact that this industry is so entrenched that there's no escaping it.
Right. But his statement raises some serious ethical questions.
It does.
About individual responsibility within a system that seems to normalize and even encourage this kind of behavior.
Absolutely.
And this brings us to another crucial layer of the source's exploration.
Okay, I'm listening.
The connection between consumerism, self-worth, and the sex industry. Interesting. Tell me more about that.
We've been talking about some pretty heavy stuff,
Yeah.
poverty, desperation, and the intricate web of exploitation that fuels Japan's sex industry. It's unsettling.
It is.
But what really sticks with me is this idea that the pursuit of luxury and social status is somehow intertwined with the commodification of women.
It's a recurring theme throughout John's account.
Yeah.
And it's especially evident in those scenes from the red light districts.
Right, where men are treating women like dolls.
Exactly like characters from a comic book.
It's dehumanizing.
It is stripping away their humanity and individuality.
It's like they're trying to buy a fantasy,
Right.
but at what cost?
And then you have the women themselves,
Right.
some seeking validation through these expensive kimonos,
Yeah, designer bags.
as if these material possessions can somehow mask those deeper societal pressures and economic anxieties.
It creates this strange and unsettling cycle
It
where
does.
women are both victims of objectification and, in some cases, participants in a system that devalues their worth.
It makes you wonder about the long-term psychological effects of navigating this world.
For everyone involved.
Yeah, both for the women and for society as a whole.
And the source points out the hypocrisy at play as well.
Yeah, like with the tour operators.
Like Hayashi,
Right.
profiting from sex tourism while acknowledging the exploitation inherent in the industry.
Exactly. And then you have the men who are indulging in these services,
Right.
but simultaneously looking down upon the women they're exploiting.
It's cognitive dissonance.
It is a willingness to turn a blind eye to the ethical implications, as long as it serves their desires or their bottom line.
It raises uncomfortable questions about individual responsibility
Absolutely.
within a system that seems to normalize and even encourage this kind of behavior.
And then there's the younger generation.
Right. The source expresses concern about how sex work is becoming normalized among young people.
Yeah, that anecdote about the single mother who wouldn't discourage her daughter from entering the industry.
Heartbreaking.
It suggests this lack of hope.
Right.
A sense that there are no other viable options for escaping poverty or achieving financial stability.
It's like the sex industry is becoming this insidious undercurrent,
Yeah.
pulling young people into its grasp with these false promises of a better life.
So where do we go from here?
Right. We've laid bare the complexities of this industry.
The economic disparities, the social pressures, the deeply ingrained cultural norms.
That perpetuate this cycle of exploitation.
It's a challenge that demands a multifaceted approach.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, addressing the economic disparities is crucial.
Right.
Creating more opportunities for women, providing better social safety nets, ensuring equal pay for equal work.
But it goes beyond economics, right?
Absolutely. We need to challenge those cultural norms that objectify women, that place such a heavy emphasis on outward appearances and material possessions.
So education is key.
It is fostering respect, promoting healthy relationships, challenging those deep-seated beliefs that fuel this cycle of exploitation.
And supporting those organizations that are offering practical help.
Yes, and resources to women who are trapped in this industry.
This deep dive has been a journey into darkness,
It has.
but it's also a call to action.
I agree.
It's a reminder that we can't just turn away from these uncomfortable realities.
John's account has given us a glimpse into this world that often remains hidden, and it's up to us to use that knowledge to spark change.
So how do we do that?
Well, it starts with raising awareness,
Okay.
having these difficult conversations, demanding better from our leaders and from each other.
This isn't just about Japan.
Right.
This is about recognizing the insidious forms that exploitation can take in any society.
And committing to dismantling those systems wherever they exist.
To our listeners, we encourage you to continue this conversation.
Educate yourselves.
Support organizations fighting for change, speak out against injustice.
Don't let these stories fade into the background noise.
Let them fuel your passion for a more equitable and just world.
Change starts with each of us. Examining our own beliefs, challenging the status quo, working together to create a future where all individuals are valued for their inherent worth.
Not for their bodies or their ability to generate profit.
Exactly.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope it's left you with more than just information.
A sense of responsibility and a desire to make a difference.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.